Alright, these are instructions for putting a grid on paper. Pretty simple, but if you haven't done it before, this is how it's done. I'm going to be turning this 8.5 by 11 paper into this. We're going to end up with an 8 by 8 paper with a 6 by 6 grid on it. So, things you will need: pencil. Ideally, you will be using a pencil. The most professional results that you can get with this will be if you use the pencil to do all your tick marks. That way you can erase anything. And if you're working in pencil, it can be a grid that's light enough that you can blanking. You can draw on top of. You can make it so that it's light enough that you won't be able to see it on through the drawing. So, what we're going to do first is we're going to establish some boundaries. We're going to try to make it so that we have as little mark making on the areas of the paper that we are going to be using as a clean border as we can. So I'm working out of a tripod here. So first tick mark, we're going to make it at 8 inches. We're going to come to the bottom, use that same measurement. This one. The tripod's messing me up again a little bit. Sorry. At 8 inches. We've got the longer lines to denote where the actual inch is. Then the basic idea of this whole thing is you're lining these up with the ruler, keeping a nice little firm pressure on it, and then just gliding the pencil or pen along the paper to create that. Now, coming back in, we'll get our second boundary. We're looking for 8 inches again. So I've got 8 inches right here. I've got 8 inches right here. Coming around to this. Doesn't really matter where you're lining up. This part, you're just using it as a straight edge. There we go. Now I've got an 8 inch by 8 inch square. The next step is to make sure I can get a 1 inch by 1 inch grid of this 6 inch square in here. So I'm going to come around to the bottom, use this line, and make tick marks again. I'm going to use the bottom of this line so that I don't have tick marks in my white space. You can flip the ruler if you want. You can do whatever you need to do so that you can see these. I'm just using marker so that it's easier to see. Now I have tick marks. Now, I'm going to make one of my 2 necessary tick marks on the white area. It's going to be at 1 inch. Right there. And I'm going to make another one at 1 inch. You'll see why in just a second. Okay, now I've got 1 inch here and I've got 1 inch here. So I could use this as a straight edge and get this whole line, but if I start at 0, lining up at 8 like we should have it, then I can bring this down just from 1 to 6. But brain had to do some ticking over. We started at 1, so in order to get to 6, we need to be at 7. I came a little bit over it, so I'm going to make a tick mark there. Then we can come over here. We can start at 1. Make sure we're not off kilter. It's very scripted. I'm not just doing this. Make a tick mark at 1. This one, actually, since we're working with paper that we're not going to use, don't need to be clean, we can use tick marks at every inch. We will use those. Alright, now I want to take my tick mark that I made here. I made sure this was at 1 inch, so I trust this tick mark a little bit more than this one. This one should theoretically, this line should start at 1 inch, but I trust that tick mark a little bit more, so I'm going to base it off of that, and I need to use this for this line. So I have 1, and I'm going to draw a line from 1 to 7. Making sure I got it nice and lined up. There we go. Now, I can do the same thing here. You can double check to make sure your tick mark is 1 inch away from that bottom tick mark you made. Line it up with the tick mark you made on the side here. So you've got a tick mark lining up. You never want to draw unanchored. That's the contrary to the whole exercise we're doing. You want to have 2 points where your straight edge is anchored, or else what's the point of having a straight edge? Here you go. Now we can take these 2 lines. This one is the least well anchored, because if you drew these lines too short or long, you might not have that at the right angle. Now we've got a grid here. So, since we have a grid and we know the lines are going to be intersecting in here, you've got these on the side, so you just need to come through here and make tick marks at 4 and 5. Now I don't need this side, but I do need my top and bottom. I'm starting at 0. You can start at anything you want as long as you've got 1 inch squares. Now if you're doing pencil, you don't have to worry about the shape your tick marks are in. I flipped this over. You want to be careful that you don't flip to centimeters ever. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright, now I have 2 anchor points for all of my lines. So I'm going to line up this to the side, and then I'm going to stop right at the wall. This to the side. I'm going to stop right at the wall. I said I'm working around a tripod, so it's important to me. You notice I stopped at that line, at that last line for a little bit. If you have to stop and recenter yourself, the guide, the ruler, can be readjusted. Your line, if you have to redraw it, is going to smudge everything. So it's better to stop and make sure your hand's in the right place to finish the line than it is to keep going and risk drawing that wonky line. Just lining up tick marks and connecting them. Now, again, this is something that a lot of people find fairly intuitive, but maybe some people haven't done it before, so that's why you're getting a little instruction. There and there. Now, we also have a benefit that we gain from this space down at the bottom. What we're going to do is we're going to come in and do a few more tick marks at 1, 2, and 3. If you've got the clear ruler on a dark surface, you might know my pain here. I'll connect those. That's going to be a boundary. I can connect these two. Doesn't matter. This isn't going to be something super professional, but it is going to be helpful. Now I can come at the bottom, draw tick marks at the same 1 and 2. I don't need to draw one at 3 because that's the end of what we're working with. Make sure your line right there is matched up. If the line of 0 is not at the end of your ruler, make sure you're starting at 0 and not the end of your ruler. Come through there and through there. Now we can take this, we can cut out our clean area. So 1 inch by 1 inch is just sort of the easiest thing to do on a traditional American ruler. But you can use the same principle to get any kind of grid you want. There you've got a grid. Now what we're going to use this for is a bonus viewfinder. So it doesn't need to be fully in there, but don't cut until you see what I'm doing. We're going to stop and we're going to try to just cut out the middle square. You can do things where you can fold the paper and try to cut it if you don't want the that slice into it, but the slice doesn't really matter.